Liver.
So I asked the Shaila today, why is it that the dogs who didn't bark, we make such a big deal about them, and for the rest of their lives, forever, dogs get free meat. They don't have to bring frozen meat from Lakewood. They don't have to pay Toronto kosher bills. And the frogs who literally jump to the ovens, you don't see anything, diddly squat. What type of recognition did they
What
get?
do you mean? Do you eat frog?
I don't eat dogs either. I don't eat dogs either. But the terrorist is poshut. It's one thing jumping into a fire. It's another thing keeping your mouth shut when you want to say something. So there's no comparison. So of course that was a much bigger Mesiras Nefesh. Okay. Yesterday we learned about somebody who was mistaken in whether or not he was being made for his wife's nether or his daughter's nether, or even what the nether was about. So the Gemara ended up telling us that from Yoni I saw, it tells us that there has to be a certain level of precision when the husband or the father is being made for a nether, and therefore, if you made for the wrong nether, it doesn't work. The Gemara does say that restriction is only if you outright made a mistake, which means I said I'm being made for my wife's nether and it's my daughter, or vice versa. But if I was stam made for a nether and I'm mistaken with who it was, that would in fact work. That was stam. That was one rule we learned. And the other rule that we learned was that toich kedibur is kedibur dami, which means that if within toich kedibur someone was able to identify the right person who the nether was for, that would also work. And it even works with other types of transactions, such as rising kriya. If someone rises kriya before the relative dies, but the relative dies, that is considered like the kriya was done after. The Ran said the reason for that is because any action that someone takes, he does it with not 100% conviction. The full conviction that he has to do that ma'isa is only a couple of seconds after he completes it. The exception to that rule are very serious ma'ases that there a person makes sure to be sure of while he does them, such as kedushin or gerushin or chas v'shalom avodah zarah makalas Hashem. That was the first half of Daf Pei Zayin, and the second half of Daf Pei Zayin was a woman who makes two nedarim in one. Choinim te'enim v'anovim elu shanit hayemes. And the husband was only made for the te'enim and not the anovim. What is the halacha? Our Mishnah shares two shitas. Shita number one is the kiyum. The kiyum on one of the two items is a full kiyum on both items. The hafara, the Mishnah says, the hafara is only a hafara on what he was made for. So if he was made for the te'enim, the neder for the anovim is still in place. That's what our Mishnah said. Our Brisa ended up sharing with us that there's actually three shitas. So we'll go through them very systematically. Let's first talk about Kiyum. Kiyum, our Mishnah says, if you're Mekayim one part of the nether, Teinim Anovim, you're only Mekayim Teinim, the full nether is Mekuyam. The Gemara brought a third sheet of the Chachamim who held that by Kiyum, you're only Mekayim what you're Mekayim. So if the nether was Teinim Anovim, and he was Mekayim Teinim, only Teinim is Mekuyam, Anovim is not. By Hafara, there was a three-way machlokes. Our Tana holds that Hafara is only on what you made it. So if you made Hafara on Teinim, it's only on Teinim and not on Anovim. The second shita was the shita of Rabbi Kiva, who says that Hafara is like a kama. If a partial akama is a kiyum for the whole nether, then a partial Hafara will also be a Hafara for the full nether. And then the Chum said, I agree, kiyum is like Hafara, but you learn it the opposite way. If a partial Hafara is not a full Hafara, so to a partial kiyum won't be a full kiyum.
I thought the Hanakama or the Shmuel in our Mishnah, it's not a Hafara at all. Kiyum is all.
There's two pshatim in the route. There's one shot in the route that it's not a Hafara at all. And just when I was chazering, I didn't want to get into that detail, but that's correct. The stuff in the route that it's not a Hafara. Look at that, I tried to put away my yad. What is Look at that. Someone has it in for my ads.
I'll go get it.
No, I'll get that. I'll do it with a finger. My nails are clean.
Which is what comes.
The last time I found it in the top of our Kodesh. Shlomi was fine enough. He's running to get my yad. So today we're learning about. Today we're learning about what's called being aware of a neder to make the clock start timing. So we're going to have an interesting shiloh today to end. So someone told me that when he was a chassan in his yeshiva, there was a shir that was offered for chassanim, not halacha or anything, just a practical shir how someone should behave and how someone needs to treat your wife and how you deal with sensitive situations. So the bacher said, "What do I need to go for? I'm a normal guy. I don't need their help." So his Rebbe told him, "Let me tell you something. There are certain things you for sure know, but you don't need any help for. For instance, everybody knows, you don't need help for that. Everybody knows that if you come home and your wife is screaming at the top of her lungs in panic because there's a cockroach on the floor, everyone knows you got to jump right in and get rid of that cockroach. Everybody also knows that if you come to the front door of your apartment and she had just mopped it, everybody knows you better not walk on the floor. Where you need help is if you come home and your wife's screeching there's a cockroach on the floor, but she just washed the floor. There, you need help in deciding how you navigate such a situation. So we're going to have such a situation today. We'll have to figure out how that works. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Yodei ani sheyesh nedarim. I know that my wife made nedarim. Aval ein yodei sheyesh mefirin. I never knew that a husband could be made for nedarim. I never heard of that in my life. So the halach is yofer. Once he finds out that he could be made for, that's when the clock starts to tick, and he has until the end of the day from there on. So let's stop here for a brief moment and analyze what's happening over here. He had some yediyah. He knew that his wife made a neder, but he didn't have a complete yediyah because he didn't know that he could be made for. So this Mishnah seems to be telling us that this type of incomplete yediyah, a partial yediyah, is not enough to get the clock ticking, right? The clock starts to tick when he has a full yediyah of the neder. So that's what we're going to extract from this first half of the Mishnah. The next half of the Mishnah, in fact, there's two pshatim in the round how to learn it. So I'm going to learn the sugya one way, and then if we have time, I'll run through it quickly the other way. So the second case was where he had a little bit more of a yediyah than in the first case, but not quite enough. Yedei ani sheyesh mafirin. I'm aware that I could be made for nedarim, and I know that my wife made a neder. Aval eini yodea shezen neder. But I'm not sure if this is the type of neder that I could be made for. So here, there's clearly a lot more yediyah, awareness of the neder, than there was in the first case, but still not a full hafar, a full yediyah, because I wasn't aware that this specific neder is subject to my hafar. So what does Reb Meir say? Reb Meir omer lo yafer. The way the Ran learns in the first pshat, Reb Meir says lo yafer, it's nishtahin and nishtaher, meaning there's not enough of a yediyah to be made for the neder, but there's enough of a yediyah that the clock started ticking. So let's deal with a practical example. A woman made a neder on Monday, and on Monday the husband heard about the neder, but he didn't know that he could be made for this neder. So what if he's made for it anyway? He wasn't sure if he could. If he could, he was made for it. That hafar is not a good hafar because he doesn't have enough of a yediyah that he should be able to make a hafar. And therefore his hafar is not good. Tuesday, he finds out that he actually could make a hafar on this type of neder. He still can't be made for it. You know why? Because the clock started to tick. So it's enough of a yediyah that the clock started to tick the moment they heard about the neder on Monday, but it wasn't enough of a yediyah to allow him to actually be made for the neder. So because of that, he's what we call kerech mikan mikan. There's enough of a yediyah to start the clock ticking, but there's not enough of a yediyah to allow him to make hafar. That is the shita of Reb Meir according to the first pshat of the Ran. The Chachamim say he could be made for today, meaning the amount of yediyah that he has is enough of a yediyah Side to start the clock ticking, and side to actually make a hafara. So he can make a hafara today. By the end of the day, he can no longer make a hafara. So in short, this case, Reb Meir holds there's not enough of a yediyah. A mikzas yediyah is not enough of an awareness to be able to be made for the nether. While the Chachamim hold a mikzas yediyah, this partial awareness is enough to allow him to be made for the nether. So that's the machloikus between Reb Meir and the Chachamim. Is a mikzas yediyah, is a partial awareness of the ability to be made for this nether, is that a yediyah or not? Reb Meir holds it is not, and therefore you cannot be made for. The Chacham holds it is enough to be made for.
Both agree that on Tuesday they can't be made for.
Both agree that on Tuesday you cannot be made for. That's correct, according to this pshat in the Ram. So let's go back to the first case of the Mishnah based on this pshat in the Ram. In the first case, I knew that there's Nedarim, but I didn't know b'chalal that there's a din of hafara. So there's a little bit less of an awareness, but there is still some awareness. So if there is still some awareness, why is it that the clock doesn't start to tick according to Reb Meir? Teretz is Reb Meir holds this level of awareness is not even considered an awareness at all. So therefore the clock doesn't start to tick at all. And tomorrow when I find out that I could be made for, I could still be made for. So sometimes a little bit of an awareness messes you up because it starts the clock ticking. So that is our mission. So just to chazer over, the way we learn now, Reb Meir holds a partial awareness. Although it starts the clock ticking, it's not enough of an awareness to allow a hafara, while the Chachamim hold a partial awareness is enough to make a hafara with. And if you don't even know that there's such a concept of hafara, that's not called awareness at all. And therefore, it doesn't even start the clock ticking according to Reb Meir. Make sense?
What does the words Yofa life?
Lo yafer means, according to Reb Meir, lo yafer means you cannot be made for not today and not tomorrow or not ever. And the Chacham say yafer today, but not tomorrow, because today is the day of the Shmiya, and today starts the clock ticking. But you could at least be made.
We also learn in Rameh that this suffix hafara is not hafara. That's what he's doing.
It's not a suffix hafara. It's not even a suffix. Since he doesn't have enough of a yediyah, he doesn't have the ability to be made. The husband has to hear about it. Hear about it means he has to have a full awareness, A, that the nether was made, and B, is that he's able to be made for this nether. Or a mini fact, I'm going to show you exactly the opposite. I'm going to demonstrate that it's Reb Meir who holds a partial awareness is good enough, and it's the Chachamim or Rav Yehuda who holds a partial awareness is not enough. So we're going to bring a double stira, a stira both in Reb Meir and in Rav Yehuda. Or a mini, the pasuk tells us that if someone kills Rachman al-Atzlan b'shoygig, oy b'chol even asher yamus ba b'loy ra'os. So someone killed somebody, not seeing, not knowing about it. Someone who's blind is exempt from the parsha of running into gullus. Why? Because below rice means he couldn't see this time, but generally speaking, he could see. He has awareness. But in this particular event, he didn't see, he heard, he didn't see exactly. He didn't see exactly what was going on, and because of that, he killed somebody b'shogeg. But if someone could never ever see, such a person is exempt from the parsha of Golus Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara is arguing that this is a partial knowledge, because a summa, Ruran tells us, he's not totally oblivious. He has a sense that someone's around. He hears rustling. A summa is not completely unaware of his surroundings. He is somewhat aware. But Rabbi Yehuda holds it's clearly not enough of an awareness to trigger Golus. So this is a steer to Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah says a partial knowledge of a nether is enough to allow me to be made for it. Yet when it comes to a Ritzayach b'shoygeg, this partial awareness doesn't quite cut it. Now we have a steer of Meir. Reb Meir Eimer l'Rabbis is assumed. It's exactly the opposite. Below rise, if you can't see, you're still chayiv in golus. Asuma is going to be chayiv in golus. Once again, Asuma only has a partial awareness. Yet Reb Meir holds it still triggers a chayiv golus. While in our Mishnah, the partial awareness was not quite enough to trigger his right to be made. So we have a steer both in Reb Meir and in Reb Yehuda, and the Gemara's answer is going to be very simple. These are two different shilas. One has nothing to do with the next. So the Ram explains in the Havamina, we don't think it's a drasha from Psukim. The Gemara thinks it's a logical svara. Do you say partial awareness is an awareness or not? And for the Gemara, Avada, the default is like our Mishnah says. If Yehuda holds a partial awareness is an awareness, and Reb Meir holds a partial awareness is not enough of awareness. But there's a special drasha in Exersa Kosov by Golus that tells us that things are different than the default. And Zok the Heilige Gemara, Amarava, Hacha Meinyani Dekra, Hacha Meinyani Dekra, but most Gershas take out the second Hacha Meinyani Dekra. Because in fact, we're not going to be medayik from the pasuk by Nedarim. We said Nedarim follows the default, where Rabbi Yehuda holds a partial awareness is good, and Rabbi Meir holds it not. But Hacha Meinyani Dekra. But when you were talking about Golus, by Golus, the Psukim tell us not to follow the default. So let's take a closer look. Rabbi Yehuda Sover, Rabbi Yehuda holds Gaber Ritzeach in the Parsha Ritzeach. The Torah tells us Asher Yavoy El Re'eu Biyar, someone who comes to his friend in the forest. Kol the Bar Male Liyar, any person who could come into a forest is in the klal of someone who'll go into Golus for killing Meshogeg. Guess what? The Sumanami Bar Male Liyar. A Suma can also go into a forest. So he is included in the Parsha of Ritzicha B'Shoigig. The Amrit. And if you're going to ask me a question, if you're going to tell me that Beloy Ra'ois, you darshan like Reb Meir, L'Rabbi says Asuma, if you're going to learn from Beloy Ra'ois to say Asuma is included in the Parsha, I already know that. Miyar Nafkale. El Shmami Na Beloy Ra'ois Prat L'Suma. So it's almost like Eini Ribui, Achar Ribui, Elalamayit. The Torah is telling me in two different ways that a Suma is included in the parsha of Golus for Ritzach B'Shogeg. The fact that the Torah said it twice tells us, in fact, the opposite, that a Suma is exempt from the parsha of Golus. Reb Meir makes the same drasha, but from the opposite perspective. Reb Meir Sover, Ksiv Bivli Das. It says if someone kills somebody, Bivli Das, Kol Devar Meida. Anybody who could know clearly, someone who could have possibly known clearly that he was murdering by seeing the victim. Visuma la barmedahu. A suma could never have clearly known that he's killing somebody because he doesn't see the person. So the default from this pasuk is that a suma would not be able to be part of the parsha of Golus. The armored below is prat suma. And if you're going to say we have another pasuk that also tells us that a suma is excluded from the parsha of Golus, Miblidas nafkalei. I already know from Blidas. Eloshmamino, beloy ra'ois, l'rabis asuma. It must be, since the Torah is redundant, beloy ra'ois, it must be telling us that in fact asuma is included. So this is not anymore a shaila of if a yedi of a mikdash is a yedi or not. This is merely a shaila of how to darshan the psukim locally in the sugya of Ritzeach. Now, interesting enough, the Maram Miranshberg brings down, which the Ran alludes to, that this same sugya is in Meseches Makkos Testament base, and there the Gemara actually says exactly the opposite in the Shittas of Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda. So the Ritva says there, the Hach sugya mehamis chalfois hi. This is an interchangeable sugya. Like to me, I don't know what this means. To me, it's just a politically correct way of saying that there's a steer in sugyas. But I don't know if that's the case, because mischalfoy sounds like it's a new concept. But there's a lot of raid here to possibly have different pshatim in how Reb Meir and the Chum reach their conclusion. So there's no Tehran, but we're learning the Pashup Pshat according to the Ram. So now let me just go through the other Pshat in the Ram, which changes it. So just to go through the main points, this Pshat in the Ram said that Reb Meir held that it's enough of a yediyah that the clock starts to tick, but it's not enough of a yediyah to allow him to be made. Right? That was the first Pshat in the Ram. And Reb Meir held yediyah b'mitzvahs was not a good yediyah, and Reb Chacham held yediyah b'mitzvahs is a good yediyah, and the kasha that we had from Golus is a steer of both in Reb Meir and in Reb Yehuda. The second Pshat in the Ram is that when Reb Meir said lo yofer, what Reb Meir meant was Lo yafka dafka b'yoyim shel achrav. Avol boy b'yoyim mefer b'yedizu. So Reb Meir, when he said lo yafer, he means in fact this mixus yediyah is a good yediyah, and you can be made for that day, and the clock starts to tick. So now it's exactly the opposite. Their shitas are exactly the opposite of what they were saying earlier. So Reb Meir Omer lo yafer. You cannot be made for tomorrow because you could be made for today because this was enough of a yediyah. Tomorrow, but not today because today it was not enough of a yediyah. So their shitas are exactly the opposite. Based on that, what's going to be the kasha over here? Rabbi Yehuda over here says, Prat l'suma. Why? Because a yediyah b'miktos is not a good yediyah. So that's not a steer at all. That's perfect. Sorry. Here. So, but there is a kasha on Rabbi Meir. So the Ran says, according to this pshat, there's actually no steer in Rabbi Yehuda. In our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda holds that yediyah b'miktos is not a yediyah, and by the sugya of ritzayach b'shoigig, it's the same thing. It's in Rabbi Meir where we have a problem, and let's see what the problem is. Rabbi Meir Omer l'Rabbis is asuma, which means yediyah b'miktos is a good yediyah. Well, that's what Rabbi Meir says in our Mishnah. So what's the steer in Rabbi Meir? Sok Ran, the kasha is not from Rabbi Meir in the second case of the Mishnah. The kasha is from Rabbi Meir in the first case of the Mishnah. In the first case of the Mishnah, it says that you cannot be made for that day with a yediyah b'miktos, because that was also a yediyah b'miktos. I knew that there were Nedarim. I didn't know that I could be made for. In the second shot, this is considered also a yediyah b'miktos. And since this is also, thank you very much. And since this is also considered a yediyah b'miktos, and what does the Mishnah say? Yofer. Yofer means that he can be made for tomorrow, not today. Meaning it's not a good yediyah. That's where you have the steer. That's how the Rav learns in the second shot. Okay, let's move on to the next Mishnah. This Mishnah talks about someone who has such a love for Shlomi Goldberg brought, especially for all the people who joined on Zoom, he brought a special snack for whoever joined on Zoom only. They get to have a delicious snack only for the Zoomers. So please, and double too. So please take it. Oh, you can't smell it? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so let's see the Heilige Gemara weiter. So this Mishnah talks about someone who had a tremendous love and appreciation for his son-in-law. And what he did was, since he loved his son-in-law so much because of how productive and how he contributed to society to such a great level, what did he do to show his appreciation? Hamader hano mechasnei. He told the son-in-law, "You good for nothing. You're not going to get a penny out of me. You better not have a drop of hano for me." The love is radiating.
I
want to tell you, I used to always make shver jokes. They were gewaltig. And one day, I stopped making shver jokes. Not because I felt it wasn't appropriate. They weren't funny anymore. And it's funny that corresponded to when I married off my daughter. I'm not sure what the connection is, but I'm working on it. Zogt the Heilige Mishnah weiter. Hamader hano mechasnei. And now he has a problem. Who writes a losses lebitei mois? He wants to give his daughter money, but the problem is there's a rule: kol masha kana isha hanabayla. So now I'm stuck because if I give her money, automatically he gets money. He should have thought of that before he did the shidduch, but now it's a little late for that. But now he wants to give his daughter money, but he doesn't want his item to have a new him. I think Shaya Banda can fix that. But I'll call upon him. What happened? This is how he can give her money and make sure that her son won't get any chelik. And this is not just because he doesn't want something to have a chelik. He has a massive problem here. He'll be over the Isha Nedarim. We're not talking about helping him avoid give his son money. If he gives the money to his daughter, he's creating an Isser. And if you remember, we learned that according to the Rambam, if I feed you Isser Anah, I get punished. I get malchus. I'm the one who made it eder. So he has a problem over here. He wants to give his daughter money, but he's going to be over an eder. So how can he do it where he'll give his daughter money and the son-in-law won't have any ownership of it? So therefore, there's no chiyuv neder. He tells her as follows.
But even if it's not ownership, doesn't I don't have a norm?
Indirect anu is not a problem. Indirect annuity is not a problem.
Indirect, if he doesn't have to pay the bill, she could pay it.
That's right. So you're bringing up a good point. If you give, let's say you tell Reuben, you may not have any anor from him. You're allowed to give his wife mizonis. Even though now you're pattering him from his chiyuv of giving mizonis, we learned earlier in the Masechta that that's not a problem, because that's indirect.
That's the same thing here. What's the problem? You just said this is the same exact case. That would be a father-in-law on his own.
That's right, but we're not talking about mizonis. You want to give her cash. But that's a very important thing you bring up. That's the round. That's going to be the roundup. So what does he do? This money to you, my dear daughter, is a gift. He has to say two comments. A, he has to say that your husband should have no rishus in it. And B, only what's being put into your mouth. So what exactly does this mean, and why is it necessary to say these two clauses? So the Ram explains it with clarity. It's so beautiful that it's not kedai for me to even speak it out. First of all, why did it talk about money, which Shlomi touched on? Why didn't they want to give her ice cream, want to give her a snack? What type is cash? Because if he would actually give her food, you don't need any type of tnai. You could just give her as much food as you want to give her without a problem. You know why? Food, if you give your daughter food, there's no such halacha of machakana isha kana baila regarding food. Only got everything else. You're right. Mizonis. That's right.
He serves her on her plate.
No. Could be even extra. Could be, can even stock. And let's see how that comes out in the round. It's a good point that you're bringing up. Let's learn the round and see if he can actually stock her cabinet.
Behind he stops the cabinet, and the husband's going to eat it.
Let's see. Who said he's alone? The problem is not who said the husband's going to eat it. Our problem is could he give it to her? Right? We're talking about could he give it to her over another. It's over that the husband can't eat it. But that's not the question.
So if
the question is, but that's not the shiloh. That's not what our mission is discussing. Our mission is discussing by him giving it to her, is he automatically being over another because her husband has a chelik. So Zok to Gemara, behind the Tnan, the Perk Ein Bein Amuder, we learned this already. The son is Ishtai. Even if you told Reuven you may not have enough for me, I'm still allowed to give your wife money. I'm sorry, not money. I'm allowed to give your wife mezonos. And we did the missionary doesn't say you could only give his wife mezonos. He doesn't have to speak that out. He can just give her mezonos, and it's not a problem of violating the nether. Why? Because the kiva the ihu zana b'makam abal v'balt he is being amazing this woman instead of the husband. When you give food to a woman, her husband gets zero schutz. What's up? Where do you get that from? Everything else you give her is a schutz and not mezonos. Doctor, and I'll prove it to you. Even if the husband himself gives his wife mezonos, that she's entitled to, and she was very frugal and she saved some and she put some away. My wife calls that her knipple. She put some away to have for herself. Voisira. And she made some extra for herself. Ein loy lebal v'oisei moisha klum. The husband, even though everything a woman owns is kanabaila, but not what he gives her from his zoynos if she is able to get some extra. Uchuda Amar, the Perik Misha Amar, and he knows her. In Nozer, we had such a case. How did the Gemara? How did the woman have her own money? With the Kamtza Meisasa, she was able to separate a little bit from her dough, and that she kept for herself. That's hers. The Gemara talks about how she bought a carbon over there. She bought a carbon. Where did she get the money to buy a carbon? Her own carbon. That money is 100% hers. That even when her husband gives it to her. Surely, if a third party gives her food, he surely has no schutz whatsoever, no choshen mishpatik claim on that money that she got for mezonos from somebody else. Mishum Haki, that's why our Mishnah couldn't talk about a case of mezonos, because if he gave his daughter mezonos, it's a non-issue. He doesn't have to say, I'm excluding my son-in-law. Mishum Haki, Tani, who writes a lachos levite mois. That's why our Mishnah had to pick a case with Dafka. We wanted to give her cash. So she should have cash with which she can buy whatever she wants, like a shaitan. And in such a case, this is no longer mezoyis, this is cash. So when he's giving it to her, automatically, because of mashakana ichakana bailo, he's giving money to his son-in-law. What should you do if a woman comes into money? Whenever a woman comes into money, it's nichsim elul. You buy income-producing property, and the husband eats the pears or gets the rent. So if you give money to your daughter, by definition, you're being mahani your son-in-law and you're violating a neder. So how can you get around violating a neder? Dr. Ran, this money is given to you as a gift, but I have to make that condition, and then you have to stick in these extra words, which we're going to explain how they work. Only what I put into your mouth. What does that mean? What's the value of that? And how does it work? How does it change your matis? If it's machakana ishakana bailo, so how does it change anything? Zoktaran, v'davka the Omer lahani trelish. He has to say both these phrases. Aval Omer ein lebailach rishus ben bilchud. If he only said the first phrase, loy mahani, it wouldn't work. Why? The masnis and Reb Meir. Our Mishnah, since our Mishnah requires the second phrase, it clearly shows us that it's following the shita of Reb Meir. The Amar Yad Isha Yad Baila. Whatever a woman owns in cash, in possessions, other than mezonis, automatically belongs to her husband. So Frek if whatever a wife has belongs to her husband, what does it help if I throw on all these words? It doesn't change the mitzvah. How does this magic work? Dr. Ran, I'll tell you exactly how it works with clarity. You know what the father's telling her? I'm giving you this cash to hold, but I'm not giving it to you. It's still mine. I'm retaining full ownership of the cash until you actually go buy food and put it into your mouth. I'm retaining full ownership of the cash. So basically, she's only getting what she eats it. So that's why I said could be he could stock her freezer as well, because he's keeping everything until it goes into her mouth. So everything remains under the ownership of the father until she eats it. And if that's the case, never will any of these items enter into the bailus, into the bailus of the husband.
Right, but then he could be mashal the husband.
That's not the discussion in the Mishnah being mashal. The discussion in the Mishnah is, am I directly giving him? If it's a good idea, this whole situation is not a good situation. They have to see a Ruv anyway over here. There's problems over here. The Ruv has bigger problems to solve than how he's going to transfer the money. The Ruv is going to say, you know what? Don't use it for food. Don't use it for Narishkeit. Use it for therapy. Avigdor once told me that whenever you make a decision about something, let's say you want to be abusive to your kids, you don't want to give them something that they need, always think of how much you're saving by not giving them something versus how much the therapy is going to cost you to fix the damage in your children. And then you have to be machshav, schor, negative seda, and then see maybe it's worth buying the kid a car or whatever. Right? That was a lesson I learned from Avigdor. Hainu Taima. Did I say it over accurately?
I bought my son the chus and I put him a car.
Right.
No, I trust you.
Yeah.
So.
Hainu Taima. Mishum the kivan she'ein isha zoiche b'nechasim kalal achatitin oisam l'soich pia. Since the ownership of this money, of these assets, do not get transferred away from her father until she puts them into her mouth. Once it becomes food, like we said, that's an exception, the only exception to the rule of Machakana Isha Kanabaila. That's why he has to say, the only thing that I'm actually transferring to your ownership is what you're going to eat. For instance, she's buying a cover with it. Until you use the cover, it's not yours, that wouldn't work, because that cover the husband will own. The Baal will be kind, meaning there's a violation of another. The Ikamanda Amar, there is a mandar who holds.
But why is taka only food mixer?
What's the reason? For that, we have to go back to Ksubas and see how that works. But we're going to soon see that it's not so sure that we pass on like Reb Meir that Masha Konisha Konabaila. Could be this will work with any type of exclusion. But why b'dafka by Mizrach? I'm not sure. The Ikaman Omar, the Huadin, b'sheyichten law, la'eze davar sheyir. If he was miyachid it not for food, but for a new blanket, for a new shaitel. Again, the lakona yasain Baal, the Baal will not be koined. Kivan sha'af law lo hikna lakamri. He was never maked her completely, only for that purpose. So we're going to soon see this machlokes between Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Now, one thing we know for sure, no matter how you want to paskin, clearly our Mishnah is paskin like Reb Meir. Because our Mishnah said you have to say Ma she'at nesas nesanis b'pita. So our Mishnah for sure holds like Reb Meir. The question is how we paskin. So Omar Rav paskin, Loi shanu ela de Omar law Ma she'at nesas v'nesanis b'pita. You could only give over this gift to your daughter if you made this exclusion. Aval Omar Masha Tirtzi Asi, buy whatever you want, then Kana Yasain Baal. Then their husband will be Kanit, and it'll be a violation of another. Shmuel and Shmuel argues. And he said, I feel Omar Masha Tirtzi Asi, Loi Kana Yasain Baal. Now Shmuel is not saying that's part of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is very clear what you have to say. Shmuel is saying we don't patkin like our Mishnah, we patkin like the Rabbanan, who don't say and therefore you could get around it by designating it for anything. So Reb Zeir asks a gewaltige Kant. Himan Asla Hashmaitza the Rav. Who does Rav paskin like? Quite clearly, the Reb Meir. He paskin like Reb Meir. The Amar Yad Isha Ki Yad Baila. So I'm sorry, I misspoke. I kept on saying Masha Kana Isha Kana Baila. It's Yad Isha Ki Yad Baila. When a woman has something in her hand, that's in her husband's hand. Or a mini. I'm going to show you that we don't paskin Yad Isha Ki Yad Baila. Because we had a child by Mavi. What is Shituf Mavuish? There's a whole bunch of four charts that open up into a big Mavi. And that Mavi, you're not allowed to carry in Midrabanan because there's a million owners who share it. How do you create that it should be one domain that belongs to everybody equally? The way they would do it is they would take, everybody has to contribute to one big meal that now makes everybody join together. So what you could do is you could knock on 1,000 doors and ask everybody to give you a little piece of matzah. Or what's even easier is take a big barrel full of wine, and you could say, I'm being makne a little bit of this wine to every single person in the movie. Now, I can't magically be makne. Need someone to be kind. So I can take a barrel of wine. I can go to Yerushalayim and I can Shlomi, be zoiche in my wine on behalf of everybody, right? So you need a third party to be kind from you on behalf of everybody. So how do you do this transaction? The person, the organizer, the macher takes the big barrel of wine and he puts it there in the middle. And he says, I'm going to give a portion of this wine to everybody in the Mavli. But I have to do a transaction with which to be makne to them. So how is the transaction done? We know by Evet Kanaini in the Shivcha Kanainis, once again, it's Yad Shivcha Yad Baila. But an Evet Ivri could make his own kinyonim. An Ame Ivriya could make her own kinyonim. So they could be coined from their Adain on behalf of all the members of the Mavi. Or, once again, if they're adults and he doesn't support them, they're independent, they could be coined from him. Or, if you hold that anything that a woman is koina, it's like it's in her husband's hand, well then when she was trying to be zoicha in this barrel on behalf of anybody, it didn't go anywhere. It boomeranged right back because it was never out of her husband's hand. Even though under normal circumstances it is Yad Ishak Yad Baila, Moider Reb Meir leaning Shitov. When it comes to Shitov, Reb Meir would that it would work. The key on the list guys, Lacherem who since she's being zoiche in it for others, miyad baila, from her husband, zochi, it works. So how does this work? What is the mechanics of how it works? So the Ran makes it very, very simple. Let's look at the Ran in the fourth intermediate line. Moidir of Meir Linishitov, the Kivin the Liskois Lachermu, Kivin the Novik Miyad baila zoch. And it's going to be a very simple way how it works. The Nehidam Reb Meir, the Ein Kinyan Lisha Beloy Baila, even though Reb Meir holds that a woman cannot make a kinyan without her husband, it's automatically her husband's, there's an exception to the rule. That's if a third party is giving her a matana, when she's koinit, it automatically goes to her husband. The Baal shenofan matana leishtoi kansa. The exception to the rule, is if the husband is giving her, something, that she will be able to be kind of independent of him. And in such a case, it wouldn't be like Nichsamaluk. It's hers exclusively. Kidarina, and the Ran doesn't make this up. The Ran always has a source. Even the Reb Meir who holds that Yadi should get baila, you don't see anywhere that he argues on this halacha that we just quoted. Hilchach, therefore, Hakanami, even the Baal Mikomoka Hakamapiklim Rishuse. In this case, by the barrel of wine that he wants to give to the Bnei Hamavoi, he's looking to release it from his Rishus. Even though he's not giving it to her to keep for herself. But just for her to be a conduit with which to transfer it to the people of the Mavi, there is moed kachner beinai. So shituvim avoyos, it's not a din in shituvim avoyos. It's a din of him giving it. When he's giving it to her, then she does have a yad, and therefore she could even transfer it out. Zok to Gemara, that's not so posh.
Her hand is mamish like his hand, so she doesn't have enough. Here, like by Kutens, here when it's him, he's the owner of the thing.
But the Gemara is going to back away from this in just a minute. You just brought a brisa where you could be mizaket through your wife. Now we're going to have a brisa that's stira that says you can't be mizaket through your wife. The following list of people you could use as a conduit to be mizaka the wine to everybody. And let me give you a list of people who it wouldn't work with. So you have a stira. One bride says you could use your wife, one not. What shot? It must be that avada, even if he's giving it to her, she cannot be zaycha. And that explains the Mishnah that the bride that we just quoted. It says you can't use your wife. So how come in the previous bride you can use your wife? It's speaking where not this woman isn't stam a woman. She also is a partner. She also has a piece of property. How did she get a piece of property that doesn't belong to her husband? How did she get this property? So the Ran tells us how she got this property.
He put it in her name.
So Amar Rabashi, Tikatani Mizaka Lahen Al Yidei Ishtoi, Davka B'Sheish Lachotzer B'Isamavi. She has her own property. How did she get it? To go into Nafla B'Yerusha B'Darusa. Before her husband had a right to her property, she got it B'Yerusha. But Lamaita, once he makes Nesuin, he should take that in as next look. But for who Kosav B'Darusa, Dinu Dvarim Enli B'Nechsai. He wrote her a shard, I don't want to be kind to any of your stuff. So therefore, this was hers alone, and she never brought it into the marriage with her because the husband denied it. That works. If he does that, it's completely hers. So now she's a partner in the Mavli. So she needs to be kind of the era for herself. So therefore, the Migu, the Zachi L'Nafshei, Zachi L'Achvid. Just like she could be Zaycha for herself, therefore she could be Zaycha for others. How could you be Zaycha for herself? Dr. Ram, like I told you a moment ago, the Migu, the Zachi L'Nafshei, L'Hata Chatzeira, the Baal, Shenosa Matana L'Ishtoi, Afilu Reb Meir Moida, like we just learned the Yesh Liad, Uchet Chasivna L'Il. Therefore, she could be Zaycha for the rest of the Mavli once she's being kind of for herself. That's the end of the sugya. The shaila is, how do we pass it? Because this is a very interesting thing. Remember, I talked about the conflicting arguments. Should I jump into the house to take the roach, but then I'm stepping on the wet floor? What do? For that, you need a rishon to tell you how to deal with it. So here we have a problem, because there's a rule in the Hilchos Isser V'Heter. You always follow the psak of Rav when he argues with Shmuel. But when it's a question of Choshen Mishpat of Din Mamonis, you always follow the psak of Shmuel. Here we have an interesting thing, because the shaila, the root of the shaila is Choshen Mishpat. Does the husband have an ownership or not? But they're arguing Lagabe Nedarim. So is this Isser and should we pass him like Rav? Or is this Choshen Mishpat and should we pass him like Shmuel? Zok Duran.
How about the item?
So it could be relevant for him as well. That's right. So Zok Duran. Li'in Alocha. Pasuk Hanogid Rab Shmuel Halevi. The Shem of Amram Goyin Zatzal. The Halacha Shmuel. We pass him like Shmuel. The Apagav the Pluktayu Hacha Li'in Yisura. The Kaimelon Karabi Surei. Afilu Hachi. Kivan the Iker Pluktayu Bedinatalia. Since the root of the Machloikis is a Choshen Mishpat Shaila, Yamriyon Yad Isha Yad Baila Eloi, Naktinon Keshmuel, the Hilchos HaKavosei Bedini. So the first argument the Ran makes from the Nogid Rabbeinu Shmuel is that since the root of the Machloikis is Choshen Mishpat, we follow Shmuel, which will be Lakula, of course. And the Ran also brings rayas from several different places where you see the Stam of the Gemara was that you could give a woman, a third party could give a woman something, and one of the examples the Ran gives is what we discussed earlier. The Gemara Nazir had a case where a woman brought a carbon, and the Gemara wanted to know, how did a woman have money to bring a carbon? It's everything's her husband's. So the Gemara said it's speaking where someone gave her money, that's by default not Reb Meir. That's the Chachamim, which Shmuel Paskin's like. So because of this and other cases throughout Shas, where the Ran illustrates, where the Gestam of the Gemara seem to have agreed with Shmuel, we paskin like Shmuel. However, the Ran says that the Rebbeinu Tam and the Ravid paskin like Rav, because even though the root of the Malachik is the Choshen Mishpat Shaila, but the fact of the matter, they're actually arguing in our Gemara, and they're discussing the Dar. So therefore, it's an Isser V'Heter the type of Shaila, and the Rambam is a little bit of a hybrid. Okay, we'll stop here, and we'll be mamshich tomorrow. But Reb Chaim wanted to say something.
Good.
No, so Lemas, the Halusa Blab as Yad Ishiki Yad Vaina, aber we can anyway geben a matune sha'ain lebal cheshis. So it's regular, anything that you give to a woman, a married woman,
without a t'nai,
yeah,
would automatically belong to her husband.
So Lemas pastor Yad Ishiki Yad Vaina.
But Reb Meir holds even with a t'nai it wouldn't work. So we don't pass him like Reb Meir. I mean, at least the way the Ran saying,
You can consider that, but that's that we have to be resigns.
yeah, that's Reb Meir, and that in fact is the sheet of Reb Meir. But do we pass him like Allah Chalamayis? What if I made it that I can't have enough for me, and I didn't say that? I gave the money to my daughter. According to Shmuel, it will work, and Allah Chalamayis we pass him that it will work, because we pass him like Shmuel Bedini, and that's the crux of the machlokes. The Rambam goes in the middle. The Rambam says you still have to make the extra t'nai, but it doesn't have to be mezoidus. The Rambam paskins that it's not enough to say in la rabbi choshusba. You have to say in la ba'al choshusba, and it should be yours until you use it. But it doesn't have to be food. The blanket should be mine until you use it. So he goes with a hybrid to mix in a little bit of each. Okay, shkoyach.
Enjoy the pizza.